everybody. Welcome to my little jungle. Hello. My name is Holly Simmons, and I am the owner of She Loves Me, which is a plant and flower shop based in Washington, D.C. Today, we're going to talk about everything houseplants. I think even before we've all been locked up at home, even before we weren't leaving the house much, people love filling their homes with plants, but especially now that we're spending more time at home, it's nice to come home to look around your home and see a new leaf or a new sprout. So plants in general are just so rewarding. At the same time, they can be a little tricky to keep alive sometimes. People have a lot of questions. It can seem very intimidating at the start, not knowing what type of plant to bring in, what's going to stay alive, what did you do wrong? The short answer is you did nothing wrong. There's no such thing as a bad plant parent. It's more likely just the wrong environment for your plant. So today we're going to talk all about that. And there's also a Slack channel for you to ask specific questions along the way. If there's anything that I say that you want me to go deeper on or need some repeating, by all means, feel free to ask. I can answer right away. And you can also use the channel to just drop any general plant questions you have. We'll have some time at the end of class to go over your specific questions. So I would love to dive right in. So as I mentioned, She Loves Me is a plant and flower shop based in Washington, D.C. We sell all sorts of flowers and plants for your home. And whenever somebody comes into the shop looking for a new plant, the first thing I ask is, which way do your windows face? Because I think a lot of times people buy a specific plant with a specific place in mind, like, oh, this would look really nice in my bedroom, or this would look nice hanging in my bathroom. But we don't always take into consideration what the plant needs. So much like a human, plants like to feel comfortable. They like to feel at home. They like to, get as much sunlight as they need, and drink as much water as they need. And again, the first place I usually start is which direction your windows face. I find that it's a really easy and digestible way to choose plants for your home. So shortly, I'm going to be sharing just a very easy, fun presentation for us. Again, there's the Slack channel for any questions you may have. So starting with our south-facing windows, we're going to dive in shortly. But real quick, our south-facing windows are typically the windows that have the strongest sense of sun. It's where the sun hangs in the sky the longest throughout the day. So any plant that needs a lot of yummy, warm sun is going to thrive in your south-facing windows. So without further ado, I'd love to share this with you all, just so we have a visual, just so you know the types of plants I'm talking about. And you'll see some very common varieties in here. Many of you may already have some of these plants, in which case, again, I am happy to dig a little bit deeper into the plant care. So here we go. 1 second. Yay. Okay. So I mentioned that our south-facing windows are the brightest throughout the day. So the types of plants that would do really, really well in your south-facing windows are the same plants you would find in the desert. So think of really dry, sunny, arid places where it doesn't rain very often. It's warm and sunny year-round. And you think of LA, Mexico, lots of South America, just really beautiful, hot environments. And the type of plants, again, that would work well in those south-facing windows are aloe, for example. We've got all the way to the left. Cacti are another really great example of a plant that's going to thrive in a lot of sun. And we also have succulents, which if you've been on the internet in the last 5 years, you've probably come across a succulent. They are incredibly popular. People love succulents because they are so unique. They're so, they're unlike any other plant, really. They have really thick, dense leaves. They have very succulent leaves, if you will. And similar to a cacti, succulents are filled with water. That's what's keeping them really hard and really dense. Unlike most leaves, you can just rustle them and they're very pliable. Succulents and cacti are a little bit more rigid. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but One of the primary reasons is because they're filled with water. And that is so that they can go a long time without water. Okay, so think of them as like the camel of the plant world. They have their own internal water resource. That way, when they're in the desert, when they're, you know, in the middle of the desert in Arizona and it doesn't rain very often, they can still thrive because they have their own water source within them. So I know I do like to spend a little bit more time on succulents just because they are so popular and because people tend to have a lot of questions about succulents. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. A few pro tips for succulents. If you all want to start right away at that picture down at the bottom right, this is bad. And bad may not be the right word. It's not great. If your plant starts stretching, if your succulent, you know, all of a sudden has a big growth spurt, but it doesn't grow proportionately, it kind of looks a little bit elongated, that is a sign that it needs more sunlight. And if you live on the East Coast, you have probably seen this happen to your succulents. It's just the nature of the plant. You know, again, being native to more sunny desert-like environments. I'm based in DC, so DC is way too cold, way too humid for succulents to be native. So what happens a lot of times is you're just kind of fighting nature there. You know, they will survive, but they won't thrive unless they get, as I said, a lot of that good, yummy sun. So if you do see that starting to happen, it's a process called growing legs. If you do see your succulent start to grow legs, I would just immediately get it to more sun, find a sunnier spot, a south-facing window perhaps, or a friend who has a south-facing window, and hand it off because it won't improve. The condition like this just worsens over time, and the plant is technically still alive. It's not, you know, dying, but it's just it's not growing as it's intended to. So that's the succulent. That's one sign to look out for succulents. I have a tip here: always underwater your succulents. The worst thing that happens when you underwater a succulent is that one of the little leaves might get a little wrinkly. It might shrivel up a little bit and you just pluck it off and move on. If you overwater your succulent, you run the risk of root rot. And root rot is irreversible. And essentially root rot happens when the soil surrounding your plant doesn't dry out, so it just stays consistently wet and it causes the ends, the tips of your roots to rot, and then it can't deliver nutrients to the rest of the plant. So we definitely want to avoid that. Most plants typically like to be underwatered versus overwatered, but specifically succulents. And then let me just check Slack here, see if we have any specific succulent questions. Looks like we're doing good so far. Excellent. And regarding aloe, I think one fun quick tip about aloe is when you, excuse me, aloe will grow to the size of your pot. So most plants, they like to be in pretty tight containers. Otherwise they can drown. If there's too much soil, they run the risk of being overwatered. So you do want to keep them in pretty compact pots. But aloe, one of my favorite sunny plants, it actually grows to the size of your pot. So you can really train your plant to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's kind of like a goldfish. You know, the larger tank you put it in, the larger it will grow. So without further ado, I would love to move on to our west-facing windows. Now, south-facing windows, I said, are very sunny, and west-facing windows still get a lot of good sunlight. It's just not for quite as long. And the type of plants that would do really well in west-facing window are those, and stay with me here, we're gonna talk a little bit about science and geography. The types of plants that would do well in your west-facing windows are those that would thrive in a tropical environment, okay? So what happens in the tropics, particularly in the plant world, is you have multiple layers of plants. So you've got your ground covering, you've got your shrub, you've got your bushes, you've got your trees, you've got your canopy. It all creates a very elaborate ecosystem within the rainforest. And what happens is all those different layers kind of block the sunlight. So as opposed to getting that direct sunlight, kind of like you would in the desert, our tropical plants get a little bit more dappled. It's still very sunny in tropical environments, but again, it's a little bit more diffused. It's not quite as direct, and that is primo lighting found in your west windows. So if we return to our little presentation here, I just want to show you a few of my favorite west-facing plants that would thrive really well in that orientation. And again, they do tend to be more in the tropical family. So let's see here. Here we go. Sorry. Okay, so for starters, we have got our rubber plants. So that's this plant all the way over to the left. And I also have a large rubber plant just behind me, for those of you who can still see my little tile on the screen. These are one of the most hardy, fantastic, wonderful, rewarding plants you can get. They, the leaves are so large, so when a new one comes out, you're like, you feel very rewarding. It's a very rewarding experience. You feel like a great plant parent, and you are. You did such a good job. They tend to have growth spurts. Most plants tend to have growth spurts during the summer and spring when the sun gets a little more intense. So this plant in particular goes crazy this time of year. I had probably like 8 new leaves within the last month. And again, they don't need super strong sunlight, but they just need enough to achieve that indirect effect of, like, similar to what you would find in the tropicals, a tropical rainforest. Another super popular plant we have here is something called a monstera. That's the one in the middle. And monsteras are also known as Swiss cheese plants because they have those fun little holes in them. And then lastly, over to the right, we have philodendron xanadu. And of course, many other plants will thrive in west-facing windows, and the same I can say about south-facing windows. But these are my top recommendations for those of you who want something a little bit more fun, a little bit more trendy, and who want to invite greenery into their homes. And similar to the rubber plant, monstera and the xanadu philodendron have pretty large leaves. So when they roll out, it's just like you feel so accomplished. I do love these. And I do want to share a quick little note about our about the monstera plant. So similar to food and fashion and interior design, there are trends within the plant world. So I would say right now that monsteras are absolutely having a moment. And what that means is when you go to most garden stores, especially your specialty garden stores, is you will find them marked up very high. So with great demand comes a little bit more expensive cost. So it's just something to be aware of. You know, if you're unsure, if you're ready to invest in such a large plant, you can definitely find smaller varieties. Maybe some of your friend already has a monstera, in which case you may ask her for a clipping of it. You can propagate monstera, which is a whole nother class. I'm happy to chat more about that at the end if anybody has any specific propagation questions. But essentially propagation, you just take one leaf and you multiply. You can, it works really well for succulents, for pothos, which we'll get to in a minute, monstera. Most plants you can propagate. And it's, again, it's a wormhole that you can spend a lot of time exploring. So, you know, again, going back to my point about monsteras is oftentimes the price of plants can be a little prohibitive. So I would maybe suggest starting smaller. The larger the plant, the higher the cost typically. That usually means that it's an older plant. So, excuse me, they tend to demand a bit more of a higher price. Excuse me. Okay, so returning back to our presentation here, I want to move on next to our east-facing windows. Excuse me. And east-facing windows get even less sunlight than our south-facing windows or west-facing windows. They still get a good amount. So, you know, palms, something that I call a pothos, it will definitely do well in east-facing windows. This is typically what most people have. And if people come into the shop and they're unsure which way their windows face, or they just don't know, these are all really safe bets, with the exception of the fiddle leaf fig all the way to the left here, which I will get to in just a minute. First, I want to talk about our pothos, because this is hands down my absolute favorite plant for beginners. Take a screenshot of this screen, write down pothos if you want to help remember. And this is what they look like, similar to that one right in the middle photo there. And pothos are extremely affordable. They are very prolific. One plant will grow multiple little tendrils, which again, you can propagate. I love propagating if you haven't noticed. And essentially, they don't need a lot of sunlight, which is why they would do well in east-facing light. And if you look closely at mine here, let me see if you can see it. If you can see mine, it's got all these new little growths, just little tiny leaves popping off. So they are fantastic for beginners. They're also great to hang because they have those long tendrils. They're great to put on a shelf. It creates a little depth, a little cascade. They're just a really forgiving and wonderful houseplant. And by forgiving, I mean, if you forget to water a pothos and you remember a couple days later, it will still be in pretty good shape. It's not going to completely die. Like a lot of ferns, if you underwater them, they're goners. So a pothos is just very forgiving. And even if it does shrivel up a little bit, when you add water, it perks right back up. So they are a wonderful, wonderful plant to give, to get, and to just keep around for a long time, because you can also train these tendrils to grow across a wall. I have one in my bathroom that it just climbs and climbs. And it's a fantastic bathroom plant because it also likes that humidity. It doesn't mind the humidity from the shower. Whereas when I first got started with plants, when I first started bringing house plants into my apartment, I loved succulents. Again, I know I keep talking about succulents, but I brought a succulent home and I heard it had a reputation for being impossible to kill. So I just threw it in my bathroom right on top of the toilet. And within a week, it was completely dead. And I didn't know it at the time, but the humidity from the shower was totally drowning it. Again, because it's a desert plant and has all the water it really needs already within it. So I didn't want to drown that. And then also, there wasn't enough sun in the bathroom. Typically, bathrooms don't get a lot of direct sunlight. So that's why pothos is a really good option. Also, similarly, we have our palms. And I've got a palm here next to me as well. Now, palms are wonderful plants, particularly because they're very affordable and they're very lush. It's not often that a plant will be both. The lusher it is, typically the more expensive it is. But palms are just wonderful houseplants. They're, again, very affordable. You can find them at specialty garden stores as well as, big boxes like Home Depot, even IKEA sells them. So it's kind of a low risk, high reward plant, which if you ask me is one of the best places to be for houseplants. And this one you can even see has a bunch of new growth coming in. So very excited about that. Lastly here, we have our fiddle leaf fig. Now, I mentioned with the Monstera plant earlier that there are trends within the houseplant community. And the fiddle leaf fig is like the Gigi Hadid of houseplants. It is like super popular. Everybody wants one, just on everybody's minds. I think, thank the blogs, thank magazines, for featuring fiddle leaf figs. And they are absolutely stunning, except they are nearly impossible to keep alive. In fact, I don't even sell these at the shop, even though like 1 out of 3 people that comes in looking for plants asks for fiddle leaf figs because they're that popular. I choose not to sell them because I don't want to set people up for failure. There's other places, of course, you can find them, but until I can keep one alive, I feel like I shouldn't be selling it. So I keep trying. I have yet to crack the code on fiddle leaf figs. If anybody here owns one and has success with one, we would love to hear how you keep it alive. But one of the biggest issues with fiddle leaf figs is that they're signs of underwatering are the exact same signs as overwatering. And typically what you see is you'll see a little crispiness along the edge of the leaf, and that could mean that it has too much water or not enough water. Also, fiddle leaf figs hate change. So the minute you bring them home from the garden store or wherever you found your fiddle leaf fig, the minute you bring it home, it's probably going to protest. And it does that by dropping leaves. And you can see these leaves are pretty massive. Now, this is an older variety in the photo I have here, but the leaves are still generally very big. So when you lose one, it's like devastating. You're like, oh my gosh, this is 1/8 of my entire plant that I just lost here. So, you know, I love fiddle leaf figs. I recommend them, but buyer beware. And they do sell smaller varieties. So again, you know, perhaps before investing in such a large plant, you can try your hand at something a little bit smaller. And yeah, I would say a plant like that in the photo would probably be between like $400 and $500. So they, you know, we're in a fiddle leaf fig moment. So either I would say wait a little bit or start smaller. Excuse me. So for our last window orientation, we have our north-facing windows. Now, north-facing windows can be a little tricky, and these are the same types of plants that I recommend to folks who live in basements or who work in an office without direct sunlight. And these are just, again, your tried and true varieties, very friendly, very easy for beginners. And I also chose ones that I find are very trendy as well, you know, that look attractive and, you know, strike that perfect balance between lushness and large size and affordability and good to take care of. So for starters, we have something called a spider plant. I also call these grandma plants because both my grandmas had a ton of these, and I just find that it's like a very classic, you know, tried and true plant. So you can even see in this photo here all the way to the left that spider plants have a mother plant, and then they have these little offshoots. So all those little tendrils that fall down are actually baby plants that if you have a spider plant that is producing, what you can do is just cut off one of those tiny little pieces at the bottom, set it on top of soil, and you're good to go. And it will grow an entirely new plant. So it's also kind of like a fun like friendship bracelet. You know, you can share it among friends and keep track of your plants, who's doing well, what's happening. So these are really lovely plants, again, to gift and to give. In the middle here, we have something called a snake plant. Now, snake plants are also fantastic and one of my favorites because they come in a number of varieties. So, you know, I think many of us are familiar with just a standard green snake plant, but they have some with yellow edges, with white stripes. So within the snake plant family, there's a lot of different varieties. So even if you're not drawn or not in love with one particular variety, you can find another one. And I'll be honest, I would be very impressed if anybody here has ever killed a snake plant. I'm not saying it's impossible. Any plant can be, you know, you can overwater, underwater, or not give enough attention to. But snake plants are particularly resilient. So if you have ever overwatered a snake plant, I'm guessing it's because it was overwatered. So lastly, over here, all the way to the right, we have something called a ZZ plant. And these are wonderful as well. They are native to South Africa. And they are one of my absolute favorites, again, to recommend, particularly because I love the shape. I think it's such an elegant, lovely shape, the way that the stalks kind of curve. They're a little bit, you know, it's not straight up and down like the snake plant. It's got a little bit more personality to it. So I do find that ZZ plants are wonderful. You can throw them in a corner, throw them in a basement, just about anywhere, and they will thrive. And similar to the pothos, as I was saying earlier, ZZ plants are very prolific. So you come home during the spring and summer, and you're guaranteed to find a whole new stalk popping up. It's just a wonderful, very, very rewarding plant. And so with these north-facing windows, I mentioned this that these types of plants that would thrive in north-facing windows would do really well in an office building or someplace, again, where there's not a lot of sunlight. I did have a customer come in a few years ago, and he told me, I work in an office, I'm in the middle of the office, I don't see any windows, there's no access to sunlight, and I really want a succulent. What do you suggest? And I told him that he should look for another job because there's no way that his current office conditions could support a succulent. So, like any plant that I shared here, there really isn't a way to cheat nature. It's not like the lighting in your office will help. It has to really, in order for it to thrive, it's got to be that natural sunlight. And there are wonderful grow lights. You can purchase light bulbs that can help supplement the sun. But for the most part, you want to find a spot in your home where that particular plant is really going to thrive. And sometimes a lot of folks ask, during the summer and spring, can I put my plants outdoors? If you're concerned that you're not getting enough sunlight indoors. And I would say you can do that. The only risks you run are if it rains and you're not protecting your plant, it's very likely that it can get overwatered. Also, much like humans, plants like stability. They like to be in a place where they feel comfortable, where they can thrive. And, if you take a plant indoors and just throw it outside one day, there's a very good chance that it might shock it. There's a chance that your plant might burn. So if you are interested in ever changing your environment, whether that's even bringing it inside or putting it outdoors, whenever you're going to abruptly change what a plant is used to, I recommend making gradual changes. So slowly moving it into that new environment day by day, maybe a few inches. That's if you have a lot of time on your hands. I have a lot of time on my hands. I used to shower with all my plants. I just thought that they preferred to have like a rain effect. So I used to bring some of them into the shower with me before I realized, like, look at your life. What are you doing? So now I just go around and water them. But yeah, in general, you want to try and make your plants feel nice and happy. So I'd love to return to our presentation for a few more points here. Let's see. So I was mentioning earlier plants that are trendy, plants that demand a high price, plants that may be a little bit more in vogue. And by that, I mean you would want to avoid anything that I call a mall plant. And I mean no disrespect if any of you own one of these plants currently. This is really just to remind you that there are variety. There's lots of different options. So, if you tend to gravitate towards these tried and true plants, I may push you towards a pothos, or I may suggest a ZZ. So this is really just for you to explore the plant world, break outside of your mall plant rut. And in here, some of my, not favorite mall plants include calla lilies. This one in the top middle here, I call this an IKEA plant. They stick them right at the exit of IKEA, and at the end of a day, you see this and you're like, this is cute, I'll add this. It's kind of like an impulse purchase. A lot of people I know who own these plants get them from IKEA. And it's actually called it's a corn plant. And, much like a calla lily and much like any other plant in these photos, it's pretty resilient. So I understand, and I definitely, any plant is a good plant. If you want to start here, that's fantastic. Again, I mean to pass no judgment if you own any of these. This is, again, just to remind you that there's a lot of variety. So challenge yourself. Try a plant that's a little bit more tricky if you can find it in a small variety, because we never want to just waste our money. Next, I want to just kind of, as a reminder for those of you who have pets, maybe dogs or cats at home, that certain plants are toxic to pets. This is by no means an extensive list. And these are, one person's toxic because another person's just a little upset belly. So, take a photo, take a screenshot, I pulled this list from the ASPCA, so I would definitely check that website before bringing a new plant into your home. So, and maybe at starters, just to be safe, putting it up high where they can't reach it. I have a cat, and he finds a way to reach just about any level. So just as a reminder, take a quick look. And again, I have to say, see a full list here, and that leads you to the ASPA website. And then I just want to walk us through a couple of resources for finding plants online. For those of you who are so energized and so excited following this presentation and you're ready to adopt a plant, I definitely recommend websites such as HBloom. They ship plants nationally. Very good company. All of these are very good companies. I've tried them all. This Sill is another fantastic company, woman-owned. They're based in Brooklyn. They ship across the country as well. And then there's Grounded, which is a company based right in DC. So I want to give them a little shout out. Regarding vessels and containers and cool pots, I do love CB2. It's the Crate and Barrel's younger, cooler sister. I find that the vessels are really modern, very minimalistic, but still very have a lot of personality and a lot of different variety for great prices. So I would definitely recommend checking out CB2. We also have Terrain, which, if any of you are familiar with Anthropologie, the clothing company, Terrain is their garden offshoot. So imagine the same beautiful bohemian sun-weathered dresses in like planter form. So you can find really cool terracotta, mosaic tile, just about anything. If that's your vibe, if you are drawn to Anthropologie like myself, Terrain is a personal favorite. But like Anthropologie, they can be a little pricey. So it depends on what's important. And I have here, when all else fails, afloral.com is a fantastic fake plant website. And they have like the Cadillac of fake plants. It's like fine silk, plastic free, sustainably made, just really beautiful fake plants. And, even though fake plants are kind of cheating, if you've tried all else and nothing else works, there's no shame in bringing a fake plant into your home, particularly if you can't reach it. I have a rule, especially with my clients. I work with a lot of restaurants and commercial clients. When they want hanging plants, I find that if you can't touch it, if you can't, put your hand up and reach it and feel it, then you can definitely cheat with a fake plant. Same goes if you, let's say you really love that fiddle leaf fig, but you just cannot keep one alive. If all of your other plants are real and you stick one fake plant in that room, no one is going to tell. Not even me. Not even a plant expert as myself would probably even be able to tell. So, you can get a little creative with your fake plants. And here's just a funny little thing I found to kind of round out the presentation. But I do want to chat a little bit more about just some general plant care and general frequently asked questions that I receive at the shop. So for those of you who can't read it, it says, "Spring is here. I'm so excited. I wet my plants." Just a little plant humor for you. I'm, of course, a big fan. So similar to those other websites I mentioned, HBloom, the Sill, another really great resource that I find for plants is Craigslist. Now, particularly the free section of Craigslist, because what you often find is people who are moving, or they're downsizing, or they've lived in the same home for 20, 30 years, and that little pothos that they purchased 20 years ago has now grown into a full bush. It's wrapping around their house. They don't know what to do with it. They're moving. They want to get rid of it. So I have scored some amazing free plants on Craigslist. So I just want to remind everybody that it's a great resource. Also, Facebook often has like clippings or propagating swap or free plant giveaways. So if you're on Facebook, just go to the group section and search for plant resources. You'd be amazed. there's a huge plant community out there. In fact, I am a member of the National Cactus and Succulent Society of the United States, the Maryland chapter, and I am the youngest attendee by maybe 30 years. It's just a really amazing group of retirees that we meet on the third Sunday of every month at a church in Brookland, a neighborhood in DC. And we all just talk about succulents. And you can find fern associations, you can find ivy associations. There's definitely an orchid association as well, which orchids I know are another hot topic in the plant world that I often get questions about. So I'd love to share just a little bit about orchids while I have you guys. So much like a fiddly fig, I am pretty bad at keeping orchids alive. I've tried and failed. So everything I say is not necessarily things that I've learned firsthand, but it's items that I've researched and learned from other orchid enthusiasts, because they are out there, and those folks who can keep orchids alive are just so knowledgeable and just so wonderful. So the first thing I will say is that the ice cube trick is a hoax. Every orchid expert I know who can really, has a touch with orchids has an issue and does not appreciate the ice cube trick that you may have heard or may have seen. And the ice cube trick, for those of you who are not familiar, is you essentially once a week or twice a week, you place an ice cube on top of the soil of your orchid. And the idea is that it slowly releases water so you don't overwater your orchid. Apparently, the issue with that is orchids need a bit more consistent water. So by the time the ice cube dries out, they're already wanting more water. And if you want to know how to take care of any plant, let's say orchids, for example, what the best way to do your research, the best way to understand what they need is to research where they're from. So orchids are very tropical plants. They are actually neophytes. They grow on other trees. So they don't require soil. They kind of shack up on the bark of a tree or another surface, and they feed from debris that falls down from the tree. So automatically, just knowing where orchids are native, how they grow in nature, you can kind of backtrack and deduce, okay, so they don't need soil. They are going to get their water elsewhere. They're going to get their water from humidity, from surrounding themselves with humidity. Does that make sense? So that's another reason why the ice cube trick won't necessarily work, because you're watering an area that isn't really benefiting the entire plant. So what I have seen folks do with orchids is they put them in these lovely cloche containers. A cloche is essentially like a glass bell jar, and it traps all the condensation, and it just creates a really consistent and even level of moisture throughout the entire plant. So fun little orchid tip for you today. And this is mostly the tips I share for orchid. I mean, you want to talk about variety. Orchids, there's thousands and thousands within the orchid family. The tips I shared today are typically best for the Phalaenopsis orchid. And even if you don't know what I mean by that, you've probably seen them again at Trader Joe's or the supermarket. It's like the most standard, most basic, and very beautiful variety of orchid. Again, it's called a Phalaenopsis. And one other thing I know about Phalaenopsis is they blossom every other year. So if you have a Phalaenopsis and all the flowers fell off and you wait for months for something to happen, keep waiting, because it's going to be a few more months before you see a blossom start to reform. So that's also why whenever I have an orchid that has stopped blooming, I hold on to it way too long. And any of you who have ever owned an orchid and lost the blooms know that it's really just like a green stalk. It's not much to look at. So again, it depends on how committed you are, how hard you want to try to keep an orchid in your life. But they are relatively affordable now, especially again, because you can find them very, at most grocery stores. Trader Joe's, again, has a pretty good selection. So I do love an orchid, but it can just be a little tricky. And when we are designing florals, because we also do flowers in addition to plants. I love working with cut orchids. So lots of different ways to have orchids in your life. Another question that I get asked often is about repotting. I think a lot of people are afraid about repotting. They're maybe a little bit intimidated. They don't know when they should repot. They don't know how large the pot should be. And in general, I think you should be repotting a lot less than people are. You typically shouldn't, again, because we want our plants to feel happy and comfortable. And when we reroot them and put them in a new home, it can cause them to shock. It can kind of just mess with their equilibrium a little bit. So I only suggest repotting when you see very distinct signs. And those signs include, number one, you water your you water your plant and water runs right out the bottom. The soil is so brittle and so like non-nutritious that it's not holding any water. Typically, most soils are a little bit more dense and they hold moisture so that they can feed the roots. But if you dump water in there and it just rushes out the bottom, that is a good sign that it's time to repot. Your soil is no longer serving you and you need to freshen it up. I also recommend repotting when the tips of your leaves turn a little brown out of nowhere. Like, it's typical for them to happen here and there. It can be a sign of underwatering, but if all of a sudden you have a very healthy plant that you wake up one day and multiple leaves have kind of browned at the tip, that's typically a sign that the roots are running out of room. So they're, getting all tangled in the pot, nowhere to go, and that creates stress. It causes stress on your plant. So that's oftentimes a sign that you should be repotting. Another third and very obvious, very clear reason to repot is when you see roots coming out. And that may be, you may see them coming out of the drainage hole, you may see them coming out of the top, you may see them busting out of the sides, there's like a bump in your pot, and that's a sign that your roots are begging for more room. So typically, I would say any of those factors would take about 2 years, 1 to 2 years. So, if you're ever unsure if you should repot it or not, just sleep on it. And when you remember, like months later, then it might be closer to when you should think about it. When it does come time to repot your plant, as a general rule, you never want to put your plant in a container that is more than 2 inches larger than what it is currently in. So, for example, I don't intend to confuse you guys. For example, this pothos is in a 4-inch pot. And by 4 inches, I mean the diameter. You can just take a measuring tape. And most plants, when you buy them, it'll say on the sticker, like 3-inch, 6-inch. So you should know, but in case you need to determine it, you can just measure the diameter of the pot. Again, so this is 4-inch pot. And I would never want to put this in anything larger than 6 inches. So otherwise, what can happen is it can drown. And by drown, I mean when you surround roots with too much soil, soil is designed to hold moisture. Again, if you have a healthy soil, assuming your soil is not spent or expired, as we talked about a little bit ago. Assuming you have healthy soil, it's designed to store moisture and transfer it to your roots. So when you take a plant and put it in a vessel that's too large for it, it can drown it. All that moisture just kind of closes in on the roots and gives it root rot and kills your plant, unfortunately. So in general, I try to just only do it when it needs to be. And again, never go more than 2 inches from what it was previously in. And the one exception, again, is the aloe, because they grow to the pot. It's so fun. I would, if nothing else, maybe, after watching this, run out and grab like a 2 or 4-inch aloe, and you'll have it for a long time. It can be really fun. It's a really wonderful plant. A couple other notes about repotting and about vessels in general. So whenever I can, I actually keep my plants in these original plastic pots. And what I do is I just find a much prettier pot, a ceramic piece from CB2 perhaps, or if I'm feeling fancy, I'll go to Terrain and get a new pot. And what you do is you would just set this in the ceramic pot. So that way it masks the plastic. You still maintain these drainage holes, which are really important. In general, I try to find pots with drainage holes, but if you fall in love with a pot that doesn't have a hole in the bottom of it, I would definitely recommend this trick, this little hack. Keep them in the plastic pot and just nestle it, kind of nest it within the pretty pot. And that way, when it comes time to water it, you can just take this out, run it under the faucet, pop it back in. It's a lot neater. You don't have to spill a lot of soil. You're not, there's not dirt all over the place when you're done with it. So it's just a fun little trick. And again, it ensures that our plant is nice and happy. Because again, we don't want to shock them too much. Regarding watering, there's a few tips, a few things that I like to avoid with watering. I think one of my plant pet peeves, and I think one of the worst things you can do for your houseplants, is to just dump your glasses of water in them. It's late one night, you're watching TV, it's time to go to bed, you see a half empty glass of water, and before laying down, before going to bed, you just dump it in a pot and throw it in the sink. And the reason, although that's very, eco-friendly, you're saving water. So I commend you for that instinct. But what happens is you're not keeping track of what's getting watered when, how much that plant got last time. It's kind of more autopilot versus getting to know your plants and getting to understand what particular signs they share of underwatering, what they look like when they've been overwatered. I think in general, when it comes to watering, I would either designate a day, maybe every Monday, you set an alarm on your phone and you kind of walk around your house and visit your plants, which is kind of the reason you brought them into your life in the first place, is to have, something to grow with, something to monitor and take joy from. So I think once a week, it's nice to just go and visit them and take a look at them and notice like, oh, this is a little bit more brown than it was last week. You may even want to keep a journal if you're, if that's your thing. You can go as far into this or keep it light as you'd like. So again, when it comes to watering, I recommend either having a particular day of the week that you do that. And when I say that, that doesn't necessarily mean every plant needs water that day. I don't want, again, you want to avoid kind of being autopilot as much as it'd be so easy and so nice to just like do the same thing every week. These are living plants. So they're living things. So you need to get to know them. You need to know their tendencies and what they like. That's if you want them to thrive and survive. So just have a weekly date with your plants. Additionally, I like to, when it comes to watering them, I always underwater. And I touched on this with succulents, but you can always go back and water them later some more. But when you overwater your plants and there's no drainage, again, you just run a really high risk of that root rot, which we definitely want to avoid. If you ever see gnats, some common pests include fruit flies, like the gnats. If you ever see gnats around your soil, that is a very good sign that you're overwatering your plant. Because gnats thrive in moist soil. They plant eggs in, it's a little gross, sorry to bring in eggs, but gnats will plant their eggs in the soil and from them grow little tiny flies. So if you see gnats, again, your first instinct should be to pull back your watering a little bit. Secondly, if you see gnats, what you can do to clear the plant of them is mix a little dish soap with water, shake it up. It doesn't have to be an exact recipe, just like as long as there's suds, as long as the water is pretty soapy, any dish soap will do. And you can just dump that on top of your plant and the soap will kill the gnats, but it won't hurt the plants. So that's a fun little tip. Other common pests, houseplant pests, include aphids. And if you get aphids, I apologize in advance. They're so tricky. They're really difficult to get rid of. They're not impossible, but it can be a little trickier. And aphids typically are little yellow bugs. You'll see them climbing up and down the stems, particularly. They leach nutrients from the leaves and from the stems. And although they won't hurt you, they can over time do some serious damage to your plants. So aphids can be a bit pesky. To get rid of those, the first thing you would want to do is just blast the plant with water. Do your best, if you have a spray hose or something that you can really get a good like jet pressure on your plants, to first just knock them all off the plant. And then there's an all-natural ingredient. It's called neem oil, Neem, neem oil. And you just spritz it on your plant and monitor it. And anytime you're dealing with pesky, bugs on your houseplants, you do want to try your best to isolate that plant. Because the last thing you want is for aphids from your pothos jumping to your palm, jumping to your rubber plant. So by isolate them, I mean find a place in your house, that still allows for sunlight, and just kind of quarantine them from the rest of your plants. So, and plant ownership is a journey. If you get pests, if you get root rot, if you lose a plant, be kind to yourself. Know that it probably wasn't your fault. I'm here to tell you that you're perfect. You did nothing wrong. It was likely just, an environmental factor, or not quite the right place. But again, plant ownership is a journey. It's learning. It can be as fun as you make it. It can also be really stressful if you put too much pressure on your plants or yourself. So, I'm here to remind you to just be kind to yourself, be kind to your plants. And even a plant that's on its way out, even a plant that maybe isn't so healthy, may have some healthy leaves still left that you might be able to salvage. So, you can try, again, propagating, which I mentioned we can have a field day with. We don't have much time left to talk about propagation, but, you can do your best to try and salvage a plant that's not doing too great. And, I learned a lot of this from making mistakes myself. I sit here and I'm telling you what to look for, what to avoid. And these are all because I've made the mistakes and I learned along the way. So, again, as long as you enter plant parenthood knowing that you don't know how long you'll be along for the journey, but it's going to be fun. You can have a really good time. And in closing, one last thing I'll say is that anything I shared today about a snake plant or a monstera plant that conflicts with what you've seen, perhaps you have a monstera in your north-facing window and it's thriving. Keep doing what you're doing. Just because I say so doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. Perhaps your south-facing window has a big condo in front of it, or there's a big tree blocking the sunlight. So you kind of have to take everything I say and personalize it for your unique experiences, your unique environment, and your unique interests and preferences. And anytime you have a plant that's failing or doing really well or experiencing any change, again, I encourage you to do a little research, find out where it's from, and kind of backtrack from there. It can be a really fun experiment in geography, biology, all sorts of different ways to engage with your plants and learn something new. And that is, to me, what it's all about. So I would love to hear from you. I'd love photos of plants. I can't even tell you how many pictures of plants I wake up to every day. The name of my company, once again, is She Loves Me, and we are at shelovesme.com, where you can find all sorts of fun workshops we have coming up and other resources for plant and flower lovers. So thanks for sharing your day.